Tonight, 13 families are hoping to hear about their missing loved ones, those who were on board the AN-32 flight that went missing yesterday. On Monday, June 3rd, an Indian Airforce aircraft with 13 persons on board took off from the Jorhat airbase in Assam at 12:25 p.m. Its destination was Menchuka Advanced Landing Ground in Arunachal Pradesh. But the plane never landed. Its last contact with the ground agencies was at 1 p.m. Sources say the aircraft was about 30 kilometers away from the landing spot when it may have gone missing from the radar. On Monday, Air Force launched Sukhoi 30 combat aircraft and C-130 special operations aircraft on a search mission that went on all night. Army was pulled in for the hunt on the ground. Today, Navy has joined the search, while ISRO satellites have been deployed to map out the area and speeden up the search. But no wreckage has been found yet.
In this monsoon time, the vegetation is very thick. So it's a difficult operation. However, we are using all our means, the electronic means, the electro-optical means, और इसको analyze करके उसके बाद हम we are going to do the visual lookout.
As the search operations continue, the ill-fated AN-32 aircraft is now under the radar. In the last 10 years, there have been at least 3 major crashes. Is there a need to re-look at the quality of our aircraft? Let's debate.
Well, before I go to the panel, the Air Force has just released a statement less than an hour ago. I'll just read it out for you. This is the Indian Air Force on the missing aircraft. Search for the missing AN-32 of the Indian Air Force continues. Extensive efforts are on to locate the Indian Air Force AN-32 that went missing on the 3rd of June 2019. The aircraft was airborne from the Jorhat airfield for the Menchuka Advanced Landing Ground. Once the aircraft did not report at the destination, overdue actions were initiated. The Indian Air Force has commenced an extensive search and rescue operation, launched a C-130, an AN-32 and a Mi-17 and the Indian Army helicopters. The aircraft are equipped with advanced sensors. The Indian Navy P-81 aircraft has also joined the search operations. The Cartosat and the RESAT satellites of ISRO are also taking images of the area. Post-sunset, the search by helicopters have ceased for the day. However, search by all sensors with night capability and ground party will continue throughout the night. All possible assistance is being provided by the Indian Army, the Indian Navy, the police and the state administration. The families of all the air warriors on board of the aircraft have been informed and are being duly updated on the progress of the search of the missing aircraft. End statement. This statement came in, like I said, about an hour ago. But there is some worrying evidence if we look at the larger picture. The AN-32 is an aircraft that the Indian Air Force brought in many, many decades ago. There are reports in the papers and the media right now that the search and rescue equipment on the aircraft that went down was out of production 40 years ago. The aircraft that went down has not been upgraded with the others. We have a total of 105 of these aircrafts in our Indian Air Force, and only 46 of them have been upgraded. Also, we've had similar incidents involving aircrafts exactly like this. 7 incidents, in fact, since we brought these aircrafts into India in 1986. Is the lack of upgrades or outdated equipment putting our forces and our officers at risk? That's the question we're asking this evening. And also, why is the government so quiet about the possible loss of 13 lives? And the conversation with me, to begin with, K.C. Cariappa, retired Air Marshal. Good evening, Mr. Air Marshal Cariappa. Thank you for joining us. Maruf Raza, Strategic Affairs Expert and Consulting Editor with our network. Air Marshal Anil Chopra. Air Marshal Mateshwaran. Manu Pabi is a Senior Editor with the Economic Times who tracks defence. I'm very, very proud to have all of you on the show. Air Marshal Cariappa, my first question is to you. Do you believe that the lack of proper equipment or upgrades is costing us lives and needs to be looked at more seriously by government?
Mr. Zouza, You know, I've been out of the Air Force for about 22 years. Yes. And though I'm not quite au fait with any upgrades or updates that there are in our aircraft today, I do believe that the Air Force is responsible enough to ensure that the aircraft are airworthy and they have all the necessary equipment. However, with the passage of time, and this aircraft is now at 30 years in the service, it is moot. You can't always upgrade all aircraft with now state-of-the-art equipment. And I'm sure that the chief at the moment, as his predecessors, have always been au fait and with the requirement to ensure our aircraft are suitably equipped for all kinds of operations in all kinds of weather. Having said that, I'm familiar with this area in which the aircraft has, the route it was taking. I've landed at Mechuka when I was commanding the base at Chabua. It's a very narrow valley, very thickly wooded, and if the aircraft has gone down, it will take some time to find, and hopefully with some survivors.
Well, very well said, Maruf Raza. Do you agree that you know perhaps equipment is not the concern here?
Yes and no. I mean, Air Marshal Cariappa is a very senior officer and I mean, certainly knows a lot more about the Air Force than I'll ever know. But there are 2 or 3 issues as far as equipment, but I also want to bring out something about the AN-32 and coincidences. The first thing about the equipment is that, you know, that I've been arguing now for some time that the entire procurement process in India is so tedious and so long drawn out that I don't think in our lifetimes we'll ever see the wish list of the services being adequately attended to. We just go from crisis to crisis, and I'm actually becoming cynical to believe that this whole process of defense procurement called DPP has been put together by a range of people, including bureaucrats, who just wanted to drag on so much that eventually we end up buying what is really the government's diplomatic political choice in equipment, because this, I mean, look at the 126 fighter aircraft deal and the controversy that followed after that with the Rafale deal. So why did we buy that? We bought it basically because we couldn't really fulfill the requirements, which of despite all the shortlisting by the Air Force in the given time frame. The second thing is that the whole DPP process is also designed, in my view, to make sure Make in India never happens, because we remain so dependent on buying stuff from outside. Now, let me tell you 2 things about the AN-32. I mean, it's a very old aircraft. We have more than 100, but it's been generally a workhorse. But also, there are certain coincidences. Exactly 10 years ago, a similar AN-32 with 13 people on board, being led by a wing commander, if I remember correctly, in June 2009, also crashed and disappeared in the same location roughly where this crash has taken place. So that's rather eerie. And the second thing is that when in 2017, generally along the Sino-Indian border, the famous Sukhoi crashed, the Air Force had initially at least alluded to the fact that it could have been a victim of jamming an attack by China's cyber forces. So I don't want to rule that out, because these days many countries are resorting to the use of cyber techniques to convey a message about their technological and military superiority, and you cannot easily track or trace where the cyber attack came from. But it wasn't with a sense of irresponsibility that the Air Force had claimed that in 2017. Having said that, the important issue is that we are quite overstretched with our resources and our operational requirements. While the services are doing the best they can, I think this government has its work cut out as far as the defense requirements are concerned, that immediate operational needs, and we all know what they are, I don't want to go through the laundry list here, must be attended to immediately and without delay and without debate.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Air Marshal Cariappa, I'll just bring this back to you and to refer to what Maruf Raza was talking about. July 22nd, 2016, An AN-32 traveling from Chennai to Port Blair went missing with 29 people on board. After searching for the plane for a few days, the search was called off, declaring all of the people presumably dead. June 10, 2009, an Indian Airforce AN-32 crashed in Arunachal Pradesh, killing 13 people on board. And there are 7 such cases involving the same make of aircraft. I also want to point out that in 2018, there was a parliamentary committee report placed before Parliament, and the Air Force submission to the parliamentary committee was as such. There was a shortfall of 48,635 crore rupees in the budget allocated to the Air Force. And according to the Air Force, the impact of that shortfall would be inability to procure spares, inability to procure fuel, maintenance and training of fleet and serviceability, and pace of modernization would become a challenge. Should this be a priority for the government? Air Marshal Cariappa.
Mr. Souza, I think, you just enunciated a very impressive list of what the Air Force bucket list is. And there's no question about it, there's no denying, there's no argument on that score. But it's just that you cannot always get what you need at that point in time.
Okay.
And I'm sure that successive chiefs have put up this bucket list to the government, and as Maruf was just saying, I'm delighted to be talking with him again, it is the fact that there is a seemingly dissonance, a mismatch because with what the Air Force or the armed forces want and what the bureaucrats are willing to part with. And they essentially call the shots. So no matter what CAS, CNS or Chief of Army Staff say or wish or want, they have very little say in the matter. And one is hopeful that today with Mr. Rajnath Singh as our new RM and with his vast experience with the paramilitary forces, that experience will be taken forward and brought to the armed forces. He started off by visiting Siachen, all to the good, but I just hope that all that he brings with him and will listen to what the chiefs have to say rather than being ruled and going on the advice of his senior bureaucrats.
Absolutely. I want to bring in the rest of my panel into the conversation as well. Air Marshal Mateshwaran, do you believe that it is about the bureaucrats in the MOD? There needs to be a relook at how we acquire and how we modernize?
Yes, Faye. I mean, delighted to be here this evening. One of the most important, what Maruf also pointed out, is the importance of taking decisions to invest in upgrades and procurements in time. I believe, we are a country that's largely run by accountants and auditors. So we work for the day and we fail to look at the strategic implications for long-term, implications when you delay acquisitions and when you don't do the upgrades well in time. Now, for example, the AN-32 was procured in the early 80s. It's a good aircraft. Every aircraft in today's technology environment starts getting obsolete even faster as we go along in the 21st century. The AN-32 needed to be upgraded in the 90s. As we move along, the upgrade started in 2010s, where probably it should have started getting replaced. That is one issue. Second, you're dealing with operations in an area which requires a lot of advanced technologies that are today available to make flying safe, to keep the crew safe, which is about, the proximity warning, excellent weather radars, the importance of collision avoidance warnings. And this is a treacherous area unlike anywhere else in the world. You go into those valleys, this is the beginning of the monsoons, the weather is completely unpredictable, and you start entering into valleys, and below you are very treacherous forests with extremely thick woodings and very tall trees. And the unpredictability of, the operations brings in tremendous amount of risk. And therefore, I think there is a lot of responsibility on the government and the bureaucracy to actually push in good investments and upgrade the defense budget the way it is required to do upgrades on aircraft and make them safe for operations. I think we failed in that area because the entire AN-32 fleet is yet to be fully operationalized in terms of upgrades, as I understand. The upgrades were the responsibility of the Antonov company in Ukraine. And I think I'm not very sure if everything has been completed. And this particular aircraft, I'm not sure if it's actually been upgraded as well. If it's not been upgraded, then it's living with very old, obsolete avionics and very poor weather radar as well. And these could be contributory factors to the problem and the tragedy that has happened now.
Absolutely, that's very well said. Manu Babi, I have a question that's come in from one of our audience members. Kumar wants to know why the government hasn't had a press conference and also why the press has been so quiet about this. I suppose for a civilian, now the gentlemen on the panel, yourself included, understand how these things work. But for the civilians, we're going to be asking, when we lost lives in Pulwama, there was a lot of noise around it in the media. These are also lives. These are 13 lives that are hanging in the balance right now. And somehow there's been no coverage. Nobody's talking about it. Why is that?
No, I think, that is a bit misleading to say, right? Because people have reported about this. The thing is that these are people, there's still a lot of hope in the family. So a lot of the coverage on this is sensitive.
Yes.
You can't really, go all out and, declare something when it's not happened. And the family's sensitivities are at play. So I think the media coverage on this has been responsible without going into, making assumptions on things. People have been careful on doing this. And I think as we get more details, more of this will come through. But I also want to respond to what, a lot
Yes,
of the
please.
other panelists have said before me. And a lot of them have slammed the bureaucracy on this, on the lack of upgrades. See, the question is, why was this AN-32 flying on this treacherous route, which we know gets bad in this season? 10 years ago, the plane that crashed in the same area, why it crashed? It crashed because the pilot went into a cloud, got disoriented, and flew the aircraft into the side of the hill. Now, there's technology which exists not to let that happen. Do we have a better aircraft than an AN-32 to fly this route? Yes, we do. It's called the C-130J. It's an excellent aircraft. It has all the equipment needed. It has all the radars, all the sensors needed, which will ensure the pilot can make the right decision. But we don't have them enough numbers. And the numbers come through money. And it's not the bureaucrats that are not giving you funds. It's the political leadership. We have to call them into question. Why is the defense budget not allocated adequately enough to replace the entire AN-32 fleet and get like a C-130J or some other modern aircraft? It's because it's a political call not to allocate a budget beyond a point to the defense ministry. I'll just give you one more example on this. There's a program which has been hanging for the past 5 years. It's called the Avro replacement program. So basically, we plan to buy a new aircraft, which will be a new transport aircraft, very modern, fitted with all the sensors needed to operate in such situations. But for 5 years, that program has not been finalized. It's not been signed. It's not been awarded. No construction started happening. Why? Because the money is not available. It's a defense ministry's budget which is stopping it from going through. And I'm sorry to say, it's not a bureaucratic decision. This is a decision which has to be a political decision. Do we need our officers and men who are flying these machines to be safe? Will any person want to fly in a machine which is 30 to 40 years old in the civil aviation sector? Possibly not. So why these double standards when it comes to the armed forces personnel? So I think serious thought needs to go into that, and we should call into question the political leadership on this as much as the bureaucracy.
Maruf Raza, same question to you, and this is what the latest reports, Vishnu Shom of NDTV in fact filed this report where he said the emergency locator transmitter, the ELT, which sends out an SOS beam signal or a beacon in this particular aircraft had not been upgraded and has actually gone out of production for 40 years. So it doesn't now. Right now, we could have fitted it with a with a particular signal that could send out a distress signal that satellite can pick up. But the aircraft that is missing was not upgraded. Is that a problem, Maruf?
Yes, there is a problem. I think Manu's brought that out very well. And at least I never lay just the blame on the bureaucracy. I always say it's a politico-bureaucratic issue. The reason being the final decision lies with the political elite. I mean, look at it, the case of the Rafale. All the file notings that I've had access to, and some of them are confidential, these were issues because they were tossed around by the then Raksha Mantri, Mr. Antony. For one reason or the other, it kept getting dragged on till the next government came in and they had to take a call whether to proceed with the last set of arrangements or recreate a new set of arrangements, which created all the noise before the election. Now, the point is about technology. You see, there are 3 or 4 issues which are crystal clear. We don't have deep pockets, but we have very large ambitions. So how do you mix and match between what your operational ambitions are and what you can really afford to provide your troops with to fulfill those ambitions? For too long, and this is historically true for India's armed forces since independence, they've always been expected to work on shoestring budgets, sometimes on a wink and a smile, and they are bold men and they go out in the hope that, quite literally, as this aircraft went, on a wing and a prayer. So, we have to get a little real about our own operational requirements, and that the politician or the bureaucrat's not going to do. The services have to trim down some of their activities if the technology or the equipment is not available for them to achieve that, and only take on operational roles where technology permits. Now, the point is, other service officers, and I'm sure both the air marshals would probably disagree with me on this, that the services don't operate on that philosophy and they go out and give it a best shot for their mission with whatever they have. But there needs to be a certain restructuring and a reappraisal, because what I am certain about, that the defense budget has been falling while, they say it is increasing, but per capita percentage of our GDP, it's down now to less than 1.5%. I believe it's 1.38% of our GDP. And that is not the kind of money that you are going to put out for the services if you want to have a world-class military. It's often been said we have first-class people in uniform, often provided second or third-class equipment. Somewhere down the line, somebody has to take a call, and I know that there is a lot of pressure being put on Make in India, but that is going to happen, if at all, in the scale that Mr. Modi envisages in another 10 years or more. You don't just jump from 0-1 level to 9 and 10. You need to go through all the milestones, and we are not quite getting there fast enough. And therefore, I pointed out to the fact that, we have a procurement process in place which more or less actually ensures that you'll never make in India. And if you don't make in India, you will have to continue to be dependent on equipment coming in from outside, often at a much bigger price than you would ideally have if you were locally manufacturing it. Though locally manufactured equipment in the past, with the exception of satellites and missiles, haven't given us reason for comfort and confidence. So there are a lot of issues, but the bottom line is that I think if we are to punch in our weight category, then we should be provided with the wherewithal to punch there, or we just have to scale down our ambitions.
Well, Air Marshal Anil Chopra has been listening very patiently. Air Marshal Chopra, we also know that the AN-32s were meant to be upgraded after 2009, after the crash in 2009. But somehow we've only managed, for various reasons, to upgrade about 46 out of the total 105. Should there be a higher priority, at least once the plan goes through, to make sure it actually is carried out?
Undoubtedly, Faye. This particular aircraft which is missing was not upgraded, and the upgrade has been rather slow, and one of the reasons is Ukraine has been going through a turmoil. There are issues between Ukraine and Russia. I must tell you that the upgrade is primarily avionics related. You're going to have a much more modern weather radar. You're going to have ground proximity warning system. You're going to have multifunctional displays. The aircraft is going to have a very modern GPS system. You're going to have the life being upgraded from 25 years to 40 years. So these are 5 major areas of upgrade. Now, if these upgrades had been there on this particular aircraft especially the weather radar and the ground proximity warning system. It could have been a different ball game. On what reason we chose not to have some of those 46 aircraft which are already upgraded, not in the eastern region. We wouldn't know. The Air Force would know it much better. Another thing I want to mention is that upgrade process has been rather slow. As some of the panelists said, that the upgrade started very late, but thereafter the whole process has been extremely slow. I must also mention that the new aircraft selected for 56 Avro replacement, the C295 Airbus CASA aircraft, it has a capability, much modern avionics. It has a capability to carry 9.7 tons vis-a-vis 6.7 tons by AN32 or 3.5 tons of the Avro. I have flown extensively on AN32. I must tell you that AN32 per se is a safe aircraft. Of all the accidents that have taken place, none has been attributable till today to technical failure, or there have been some cases where the cause was never known. But notwithstanding that, the modernization process has been very slow. The budget allocations are coming down every year. Today, we are below 1.5% of GDP. Now, I must tell you, the wish list of Indian Air Force requires 100,000 crore. I mean, we require about 3 times our budget every year if you really want to make the wish list. After all, the fighter aircraft itself will require such a large numbers. Then there are missiles. There are so many other fleets. Now, one more point I want to make is that C-130 is not the correct aeroplane. It's a special forces aircraft for special operations. Cannot be the workhorse the kind AN-32 is. And therefore, whatever solution, whenever AN-32 will have to be finally replaced, it will have to be some other aircraft, because C-130 is too expensive. It has got the kind of equipment which are not required for air maintenance, the kind of work that is going on over there.
Yes, in fact, we have a couple of questions coming in from our viewers, and if our panel will be so kind as to answer civilian questions this evening. Air Marshal Cariappa, here's a question from Krishan Sharma, who says, if the armed forces aren't able to raise these questions in the public domain, who will raise their concerns? Do they have enough room? For example, and you did say, of course, that the current air chief would never want to, or would never choose to send his team up in an aircraft that he believed was inadequate. Do the armed forces have enough room to raise these problems with government at this point?
I believe the armed forces do have the room. The question is, are people listening to them? It's one thing to hear, but are you listening? And no matter how often the chief may raise the roof, the question is, somebody has to listen to what he is saying. And having said that, I would like to digress a little bit, talk about this tragedy which seemingly is unfolding. There are certain standard operating procedures when operating in the mountains. One is that you never fly in the mountains in what is known as instrument flight conditions or flying in cloud, because you don't know what's ahead of you. Unless you're sufficiently high, in other words, well above the crest line of the mountains. As I said earlier, I'm familiar with flying in the Mechuka area, and the mountain sides go up to about 9,000 or 10,000 feet. We don't know what happened. Has this aircraft flown into terrain? If you remember, a few years ago, we had an Mi-8 or an Mi-17 in Uttarakhand, which went into a hill on an otherwise clear day. But coming back to this, the question is, who is listening to the chief? Is government listening? And I am quite sanguine and optimistic that with a new dispensation, with a gentleman at the helm of affairs who has been associated with the paramilitary force and now brings his expertise to the Ministry of Defense, he will listen to what the present chief is saying. He is due to retire in a few months' time, and whoever his successor is will continue to have the year of the Raksha Mantri.
Well, Forgive me, Air Marshal Cariappa, for asking you an uncomfortable question, but are you suggesting that Mr. Rajnath Singh, as Defence Minister, will be more open to the needs of the forces as opposed to Nirmala Sitharaman or Manohar Parrikar, who had the position before her?
No, I'm not suggesting that. It's just that Mr. Parrikar, unfortunately, was very popular as RM, considered a gentleman and what have you. You know, I have no first-hand experience with any of these the previous RMs, or for that matter, with Mr. Rajnath Singh. Mrs. Swaminathan, Mrs. Nirma did a good job, I'm sure. But, you know, I'm so far removed, 23 years into retirement. And so the nuts and bolts and the pros and cons of all that went on in the Ministry of Defence are something really, as far as I'm concerned, I'm treading on very deep water, which I know nothing.
Right,
but I'm hopeful that Mr. Rajnath Singh will, as I said...
Yes, absolutely. We all are. We share your hope. Manu Pabi...
I'm hoping that Mr. Rajnath Singh will listen to the Chief.
Yes. Opening this up again, Manu Pabi, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to bring it in, you know, the question of how effective Parrikar and Sitharaman were. They were good ministers, but the problem in the past 5 years was that there were too many changes in the ministry. We had 4 ministers in a span of 5 years. So yes, the forces do feel that some of their requirements, some of their problems could have been addressed better if there was more continuity. So I think the hope is that Mr. Rajnath Singh, with the political heft that he carries, if he does continue to be the full-term defence minister, a lot of the concerns which otherwise, you know, are taken halfway through could be taken more strongly. So that is, I think, what the armed forces are looking for at this moment.
Maruf Rasa?
May I?
Please.
Well, you know, I just want to build up a little more on Air Marshal Cariappa's point. You see, we need to understand the civil-military relations matrix in India is perhaps the most bizarre in any major country or any democracy. Because in most countries, you have politicians who are technocrats and they deal directly with the armed forces. Or you have politicians who, or you have a kind of mix wherein the armed forces deal not with technocrats but directly with the politicians per se. Here what happens is that, as Mr. Manu Pabi just brought out, that, you know, very often the people who get thrown into the Ministry of Defence, and it's not a small ministry, it's actually many ministries combined under one, and you know, it may have a case in trying to separate each arm and service and give them a Minister of State so that they can engage with the person concerned instead of the Raksha Mantri, who's also sitting in a huge defence public sector undertaking setup, which has another 4 or 5 secretaries out there. So the problem is that the Raksha Mantri doesn't come in with, by and large, any expertise on the matter, is then dependent on the bureaucracy as the people they would engage with, because if you go into the Government of India's Rules of Business of 1961, it is the Raksha Mantri and the Defence Secretary who is responsible for the defence of India. The service chiefs are not responsible as per that. The whole system has been created from Krishna Menon's time in such a way that the military is kept completely out of the narrative. So what happens is the Raksha Mantri is dependent on the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy doesn't engage with the military adequately so that they don't get the nuts and bolts that they need to understand quick decisions that need to be made, whether in equipment purchases, modernizations, whatever else. So the whole process goes from files circulating around South Block, and we just end up with endless delays. So that is really, you know, one of the real things that many of us have been arguing for years is to restructure and re-energize civil-military relations. And one is not putting the blame on any one person's door, but the whole damn system is outdated and needs to be changed if India's services are going to get their due and the services are going to be heard. Right now, they're not heard enough, and if they speak, they could be speaking to the wall.
Well, we have Colonel Shukla, who's called us on the phone line from Pune. Colonel Shukla, good evening. Go ahead, we can hear you.
Yeah, good evening, Faye. Firstly, we love watching your program, Mirror Now. I was just listening to Maruf Raza's comments, and I agree with him to some extent. You see, my belief is that unless we in the defense forces, our top brasses, are firm about our requirement, we cannot move forward. But I will not call it as raising the voice against the establishment. If Maruf is saying that this system has been existing since Defense Minister Menon's time, then it's high time we change the system. And for changing the system, I believe personally, it's my personal view, that the army, the defense top brasses are responsible for that. If for once we start putting our foot down, I don't think any government will not listen to the organization for which so many casualties are happening, whether it's Army, Air Force or Navy, for the lack of modern equipment.
Very well said. Colonel Shukla, thank you for calling in. Anyone on the panel who wants to respond to that? Because, a few weeks ago, Maruf Raza was on a conversation where we were talking about faulty equipment costing lives in the army. Air Marshal Chopra, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Firstly, I must tell you that having worked closely in air headquarters with various senior officers, including air chiefs, I must tell you that each and every air chief repeatedly has been uprising the government at the level of Raksha Mantri and the Prime Minister repeatedly every year, every few months. And in fact, detailed letters, correspondence is there between the service chiefs with the government at these levels on a regular basis. So there is a general impression, sometimes wrongly being carried everywhere, that the services are not putting their foot down. I mean, short of saying, okay, I will resign if you don't give me money, I think the service chiefs are putting down everything in strong words, and it is in writing. So that is issue number one. I want to come back to, since the aircraft is still missing, the families are still waiting, I think I need to come back once again to the search and rescue exercise that is still going on, which is an important part of how we started this debate. The aircraft, as you mentioned in the beginning, is supposed to have an ELT, the electronic locator transmitter. Now that normally gets activated the moment the aircraft crashes beyond a certain G, or if it goes into the sea, as the salt water gets connected goes into the system, it's get activated. Now why that ELT has not functioned, why it's not transmitting, or why we are not receiving the signal is an issue which in due course we will have to find out. Certainly it's an old equipment, 25, 30-year-old equipment. So there are questions that will come on that. Now the Su-30 has got an ELTA pod which is supposed to, which carries out, search. And that is why Su-30s were the first to brought into this search. And this radar can do spot or scan search. Now the naval P-8I has also been brought. The RISAT, which is the radar-based satellite, are also there. The Army, Navy, and the civilian population, the state government, I think they are doing a tremendous job. Round the clock, day and night work is going on. And I think we need to compliment everybody, and we sincerely hope that the wreckage will be quickly found, and a finality will come to this whole incident.
Absolutely, and our thoughts and our prayers are with the families of these 13 officers.
Faye, can I say a word?
Yes, please go ahead. Air Marshal Mateshwaran, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Now, I think much of all the service chiefs or the service headquarters will always project what is required from operational terms. That's a case, and that's an extremely important. But I think the problem goes into a much deeper and a larger issue. And that came out when Manu Pabi was actually talking about the budget allocations, etc. See, there's a deep-rooted, belief that defense budget and defense expenditure is something, of a drain on the economy that is inevitable. So try and do as minimum as possible, or as as slowly as possible, giving priority to the others. That's fine. But fundamentally, this is a flawed understanding of the whole process, because countries that have done well, and I'll give the example of France particularly, is that unless you consider defense expenditure, defense budget is linked to the national economy as a critical dimension of national economy, then none of your Make in India processes, none of your other upgrades, etc., will fall in place. And because we've not addressed it that way, then we don't allocate adequate amounts at the right time. We always delay it. And any delay actually in the long run becomes far more expensive. Now let's take the AN32 itself. If you've done this allocation at the right time and you've actually done, because much of the, even the 40 aircraft, firstly it should have been done for all nearly 200 aircraft, 190 odd aircraft. I don't understand why that's not been done. So if that has been allocated, the first 5 aircraft were to be done in Ukraine and the remaining were to be upgraded by our own BRDs and industries involved in India. Then actually you should understand that when you do that in India, there's a lot of jobs that are being created, there is an economy that's being supported, there is a capability that's being built up, there are skill levels that are going up. This is what the defense economy brings into the national economy system. And I think here's a major flaw in our entire process. And if we don't understand this process, our defense budgets will always be insufficient. They'll always come later than when it's required. When they come later, then every upgrades and every development and every acquisition is stretched out beyond acceptable time limits. It doesn't meet the service chief's operational requirements. They come much later. Some of them become obsolete when they enter service, or they're on the verge of obsolescence when they enter service. So the service chiefs for their operational requirements are always managing. It's like a crisis management. And we must understand at the end of the day, the military will do its job irrespective of what it has. It will fight with what equipment it has. But that's not the way we should be looking at. Peacetime operations, air maintenance. I think we've come to a stage where every country, advanced country, its military transport aircraft are at par with civil commercial airliners in terms of safety, in terms of reliability. And I think that needs to come in. And if that comes in well, then I think you will actually do far better, reliability, safety standards in the military operations. You have acquired C-17s, C-130s, they have that kind of an equipment. So if you have older aircraft, if you take 5 years to decide on Avro replacement, again, you're losing a lot of time.
Yes.
Look at the whole purpose of Avro replacement going into private industry was to generate and energize the private industry. And that should have been done well in time. And if you've lost 5 years, you've lost a lot of opportunity in building into the national economy in the whole. I think this is a major problem in our entire understanding of the whole process.
Well, I want to take this back to Maruf Raza. Raza, we've had so many conversations on this channel about equipment across the forces, across the Army, Navy, the Air Force and the paramilitary forces. And unfortunately, the responses we get are largely on the same lines. To consider the fact that the aircraft in question that's currently missing was flying with equipment that was 40 years old, what other sector would 40-year-old equipment be acceptable in? It's not acceptable in the medical sector. No surgeon would operate with equipment that was 40 years old. Nobody would drive a car that was 48 years old or 40 years old. Why is it that our servicemen are required to put up with this or to lump it or just continually, like you said, grin and bear it and give us the best they can of a bad situation? Why do we have to create the bad situation at all?
Well, many of the important points have already been brought out by the speakers like Manu Pabbi and Air Marshal Matheshwaran. You see, the point is that, as I said in the initial comments, that our procurement process is so tedious and so long drawn out that by the time any equipment comes to us, which is regarded as new equipment, it's already halfway to becoming vintage. Because, you'd be lucky if you get fighter aircrafts, for example, for the Air Force, in less than a 15-year time span. We've seen with the Rafale deal how long it took. Go back into the history of most of our procurement. Unless they are done under the FMS route, that is a government-to-government purchase, they just take ages. And the C-130J we were just talking about, or the C-17s, or even now what we are likely to get is the AH-64 Apaches for the Air Force. These are all government-to-government deals. If you go through the whole process, you not get it at least in 8, if not 10 years. The whole process is so designed. And therefore, it makes me cynical that we need to scrap that process. We just need to go straight forward and tell the armed forces, A, that this is the money we have. Now make good your major immediate wish list, because I know service chiefs have told me that we are only able to buy equipment that is critically we are short of. we are not able to do any what they call LTIPP, long-term integrated perspective planning. All that gets done on paper. It doesn't get implemented. The second thing that we need to do is the government needs to get these damn PSUs, which are getting fat on government money and they don't deliver enough, barring aside an ASAT test that the DRDO does, but it gets them to actually give up space and allow private competition and industry to come in. We are just not letting the expertise come in which exists in the country because the PSUs and the secretaries and the joint secretaries sitting on top of them are not opening the windows for that. They said this is secret equipment. It's bizarre. I mean, the same equipment that you buy from abroad, as though the top secret equipment is not known to half the world's top security analysts by the time it arrives out here. But if somebody wants to get in from in the Indian industry, the Tatas or whoever else, then they're told, sorry, this is no-go area for you. So we've got to really revisit this whole thing, because the bottom line is that we are losing lives, and the Air Force and the Air Marshals, 3 of them out there, will probably agree with me, at least not with much excitement. But the fact of the matter is that the Indian Air Force has a pathetic record of crashes. And it's not because of pilot errors. Our pilots are first class. It is because the equipment is stretched to the limit when it begins to crash, and when it's even upgraded, 50% there, 50% in India, our PSUs are not able to upgrade them enough that even in a test flight after an upgrade, as we saw in a recent case with the Mirage, it crashes on the runway itself in Bangalore.
Well, absolutely, we shouldn't forget that case. I'll give the last word to Air Marshal Cariappa. Air Marshal Cariappa, unfortunately, like you said, of course, our armed forces will never turn around and say we can't work with this equipment. When push comes to shove, they will do whatever it takes. They will do whatever is necessary. But shouldn't that situation be improved? Do you want to react to what Maruf Raza just said?
Well, I agree with what Maruf has just said. However, let us not demoralize the aircrew who are flying these aircraft, no matter they're 30 or 40 years old. Let us, I am sure that this particular aircraft that is presently missing was serviceable in every respect, in every aspect. That the electronic locator beacon is not functioning let us look upon it as a glitch. But I am looking at it from the point of view of the morale of the men who are servicing and flying the aircraft. It is the responsibility of the government, of the Air Force, to make sure that they don't lose faith in the equipment that they have. It is for this reason, is my guess, that our chief, the air chief, continues to fly the MiG-21, the upgraded versions of the MiG-21, purely to send a message home to his crews, to his technical, to his ground crew, to his air crew, that there's nothing wrong with the aircraft. Unfortunately, flying is an inherently dangerous profession, more so military flying. And I think it is important that we must maintain the morale of personnel, or what we call the air warriors, irrespective whether it is a Safai Wala or whether it is the commander-in-chief of a command. The morale must be maintained, and it is the responsibility of those at higher levels to make sure that there is no, let us say, a degradation of the level of morale of our personnel.
Very well said. We've run out of time. Gentlemen, I want to thank each of you for being generous with your time and, and your insight this evening, and helping us understand what is really going on in this particular case. Like I said at the beginning of the conversation, our thoughts and our prayers are with the 13 officers on board this aircraft and their families that are waiting for information at this point. We're going to continue to bring you information of the search and rescue as and when it happens. For now, there's an appeal to the government of India as it begins a new term to consider perhaps more seriously the needs of the armed forces as far as equipment and upgradation of equipment is concerned. We cannot have our forces go up in planes with equipment that's 40 years old. None of us would do it. We shouldn't make them do it. Thanks for watching. Good night.